Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you here today to the introductory event for our local economic and community plan guidelines. My name is Barbara Nigengasa, and I'm the Assistant Secretary General in the Department of Rural and Community Development. And I'm delighted to see you all here in such numbers. The last time I checked, there were about 350 people registered for this event, which I think is an indication of the degree of interest and enthusiasm for these guidelines and enthusiasm for the process of engagement with communities in the design of the next phase of the local economic and community plans. So, as you know, these plans were jointly launched on the 11th of November by our Minister for Rural and Community Development, Heather Humphreys, and the Minister for Housing, Local Government and Heritage, Sarah O'Brien TD, together with the Minister of State for Communities and Charities, Joe O'Brien, and the Minister of State for Planning and Local Government, Peter Burke. And coinciding with the launch of the guidelines, our department, the Department of Rural and Community Development, has also launched an LCDC support page on the LGMA SharePoint site. And that's a dedicated portal to engage with and share information and resources with members of LCDCs. So as you know, the local economic and community plans are provided for in the Local Government Reform Act, and their purpose is to detail how local authorities can support economic and community development in their areas over a 6-year period. And the new guidelines that we're presenting today will assist local authorities, LCDCs, and the relevant SPCs with the development of their plans. And we have a focus in them on sustainability, consultation and engagement with local communities and local businesses. So the guidelines are designed to support a participative and consultative process for the development of each LECP. And this new approach to the process will ensure that the LECPs are more agile and more flexible and will allow for emerging needs over the 6-year period. And they'll also crucially support a more integrated and collaborative approach to the process so that we have a coordinated delivery of actions at local level. Our department, the Department of Rural and Community Development, has been working together with the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage to develop these guidelines in order to support the integrated planning. But we've been also hugely supported in the process by an advisory group, which included representation from all the local authorities, from representatives, of the local authorities, and from the regional assemblies, as well as the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment for the business. So today's event is an introductory and information event, which will provide you with an overview of the LECP guidelines, highlighting what is new, clarifying what the planned timeframes are, and highlighting the linkages with the relevant national strategies and initiatives. So we will start with a joint presentation from Lisa Keaveney in DRCD and Regina Deegan from the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage. And they will both outline the background, the new approach and the economic and community elements of the guidelines, including the roles of the LCDCs and the SPCs in the process. And after that presentation, we will hear from Sonia Kavanagh. Sonia is Interim Chief Executive in Kildare County Council, and she's going to give a presentation from the local authority perspective. Sonia was also a member of the LECP advisory group. And then Sonia will be followed by Kieran Moylan from the Department of Rural and Community Development. Kieran is the principal officer in the department who has responsibility for the LECP guidelines and for the rollout of the guidelines and indeed for the LCDCs. And Kieran is going to outline to you the next steps that we have in mind to assist you and support you in the development of the guidelines. And finally, bringing the morning to a close, we will have some closing remarks from my colleague, Mary Hurley, who is Assistant Secretary in the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage. So we look forward very much to working with all the stakeholders to support the development of strong integrated local frameworks through the LECP process. And they will provide, we hope, the foundation for economic and social recovery in all of our local authority areas and support sustainable development over the next 6-year period. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank everyone who was involved in bringing these new guidelines to completion, and in particular, thank the members of the advisory group who put in a lot of time and energy since the beginning of this year to bring them to finality. So unfortunately, today is just an information day and an introductory event. There won't be an opportunity today for questions and answers due to the high volume of attendees and the time constraints we're under. However, our department is very willing to answer any queries and questions you have. So I would encourage you to submit any comments or questions you have by email to lcdsupport@drcd.gov.ie, and that email address will be up on a presentation shortly. And we're happy to answer any queries you have. And also the good news is that we are organising a series of further training webinars, which will take place early in the new year. And you'll hear more about them later from Kieran. But those events will be more interactive and participative, and you'll have an opportunity to have discussions and questions and answers and comments on the guidelines. So today is just the first taster of what we have in mind for the rest of the year. So I hope you will find this morning's presentations helpful. And without further ado, I'm now going to hand over to Lisa Keaveney. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Barbara, and good morning, everybody. My name is Lisa Keaveney, and I'm the Assistant Principal with the Community Policy Unit of the Department of Rural and Community Development. As Barbara said, I'm joined by my colleague Regina Deegan from the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage, and we're just going to take you through quite a high-level overview and introduction of the guidelines and just the process around development and implementation of the guidelines. So thank you all for coming. In normal circumstances, I'd say it's lovely to see you, but unfortunately the only person I can see here is myself, which is a little disconcerting. But look, we'll barrel on. So just in the first instance, I want to just give a bit of background. Now, I do know most people here will have a firm grasp of this and have been around, but I'm also conscious that there are people here who are brand new to this. So I just want to set a bit of a context, I suppose, around the background to this. So in the first instance, Putting People First, the action plan for effective local government from 2012. This set a new overall vision for local government, a stronger, clearer role, very much as the leader of economic, of social and of community development in their local areas. So that the vision from that was developed and given a legislative footing in the Local Government Reform Act of 2014. So quite significant reforms there in that act. New structures in the LCDCs themselves, and also the PPNs, public participation networks, and this is where the local economic and community plan and the requirement for it also came from. If anyone wants to do a deeper dive into it, Chapter 2 of the 2014 Act is the relevant chapter, which sets out the role and the functions of the LCDCs. And just in respect to the LECP itself, most of you will be aware of the purpose of the LECP. It's to set out for a 6-year period the objectives and actions needed to promote and support the economic development and the community development of the relevant area by the local authority themselves, but also in partnership with other economic and community stakeholders. So as the local framework for the economic and community development, the plan is also the primary mechanism to bring national strategies and regional strategies that have a local bearing to the local level. Then just in terms of the economic and the community elements, they are separate, but at the same time, it is important from the outset that if they can be integrated, that they are, and also that there is an ongoing collaboration from the very outset between the community and the economic. Because they aren't standalone, and it does make sense that the strong economic performance does assist with developing and building sustainable communities, and also on the other side that community development actions do help support economic activity. Just in terms of the aim of the guidelines themselves, look, they're to support you, to support the local authorities, but also all the relevant partners in both developing and implementing really strong 6-year plans for their local area that will support sustainable development. And the guidelines are very much an outline of both the development and the implementation processes, but they are just that, they're an outline. There is a recognition that every local authority area is different. There will be different priorities, different community needs, and different interventions will be required. Just in terms of the context, why are we here in December 2021? The existing plans, which are the first iterations of the LECPs, have either come to an end during the course of 2021 or they're due to end in 2022. So the anticipation is that the new LECPs will be in place across the country throughout 2023. So the new guidelines that were published last month build on not just the lessons learned, but also the best practice that has emerged from the current LECP cycle. And also they've built on and have attempted to give regard to the very different situation we find ourselves in 6 years on, the changed policy, strategic, but also the socio-economic context. And the LECPs are part of the overall process for national transformation set out in Project Ireland 2040, so the National Planning Framework and the National Development Plan. And I have a slide there just on the consultation process around the guidelines. I don't want to get into this in any depth. It's more so to say, I suppose, that look, this wasn't a solo run. There was a widespread consultation and we got really excellent feedback and interaction from various stakeholders across the country in the course of preparation of the guidelines. As Barbara mentioned, we had an advisory group in place. We received a large number of written submissions from departments, from local authorities, regional assemblies, LCDCs and SPCs. And there was also a number of focus groups that we got really great feedback from in terms of, again, their learnings and the best practice that has emerged. So then what we have now is a changed process, the most significant change being around the fact that this is now a 2-part process. So last time round, we just had the LECP, we had that 6-year document, often hundreds and hundreds of actions, very little flexibility. So based on the consultation process, what we're now looking at is a 2-part process. And the first part of that is that overall what we would call an LECP framework. So that's the overarching strategic plan, still for your 6-year duration. And what it will set out is the high-level goals and the sustainable community and economic objectives for the 6-year period. And then that in turn, that framework will be supported by a series of implementation plans. So this is where the detail will be found in terms of achieving the goals and the objectives set out in the LECP. So the implementation plans will detail the inputs, the actions and the resources needed for the particular planning period. Now, the guidelines themselves, they're silent as to the duration of the implementation plans, but the expectation would be that those plans would be of a 2-year duration, and I think that was felt during the consultation process to be the most appropriate period. And the purpose of this new 2-part process is to facilitate a more agile, a more responsive approach to the delivery of what's set out in the LECP. It will allow you to take account of emerging needs that come to light over the 6 years, and also newly emerging programmes and policies. And just to say that the first of the implementation plans should be presented for approval with the LECP framework itself. Now, this diagram, I just pulled it directly from the guidelines. It's an illustration of that overall process, I suppose, the framework LECP, the implementation plans, how they fit together how the specific time-bound and measurable actions from the implementation plans will feed back towards achievement of the high-level goals. And just back to the framework LECP itself, that is comprised of 6 stages. So 4 of them developmental stages, 1 for implementation, and then the final stage just for monitoring, evaluation and reviewing. So across those 6 stages, there's a variety of roles, some of them statutory roles, not just for the local authority, also for the SPC, for economic development and enterprise, for the LCDCs, also a role there for the regional assemblies and the municipal district members. And then quite a significant role for the advisory steering group, which I'll come back to in just a minute. Just again, you probably not able to see this in detail, but this is pulled directly from the guidelines, and I think it's just a really good illustration of the entire process from stage 1 through to stage 6. Just a little bit of guidance on what each stage entails, and also the relevant roles at each stage. And just to say there, in relation to stage 1, which is the preparatory stage, there is a statutory requirement that every LECP be reviewed at least once during its lifespan. So some areas will already have carried out the review of the existing LECP, but just to say for those who haven't, that a review as part of that stage 1 preparation will satisfy that statutory requirement. And then for those who have already carried out that review, the findings of that should feed into that preparatory stage. Then just in terms of the advisory steering group as well, the advisory steering group has a really key role at every stage of the process, from the initial preparatory stage through to the monitoring, etc. So they have a role in terms of a coordination, in terms of managing communications with stakeholders, ensuring the integration of the community and economic elements where that's possible, and also ensuring consistency with all the other plans, with the RSES, with the city and county development plans, and with the relevant national strategies and plans. So given how central this group is, I would be saying that the establishment of this group should be the first step in the process. In terms of membership, again, this is set out in the guidelines. What we are suggesting is that it would be at least 1 member of the LCDC, at least 1 member of the relevant SPC, the chief officer or a nominee, the director of service for the relevant SPC, and then also any other individuals who both the SPC and the LCDC agree would add significant value to the work of the group. And those people can come from public or from private organisations, but just bearing in mind that the public-private balance for decision making must be respected here also. And also bearing in mind, as I've said, this group is very central to the entire process, so you don't want a very large, unwieldy group. So just to keep that in mind also when thinking about membership. And I just wanted to list the cross-cutting priorities that are set out in the guidelines. So there's 6 of them that need to be kept to the forefront of the mind at all stages during development and implementation. They're sustainability, including climate change, equality, which includes gender equality, poverty, rurality, age, and disability. And now there are suggestions within the guidelines as to how these priorities can be worked into the process. And just to speak to the community elements briefly, the key role here is for the LCDC itself. So the LCDCs were established to develop, coordinate and implement a coherent and integrated approach to local and community development. So as part of that role, the LCDC have responsibility for both development and monitoring of the community elements of the LECP. So in developing the community elements for inclusion, the focus should be on the key social and economic issues that have relevance and can be addressed at a local level. with a focus on and with a view to improving the well-being for citizens and improving the quality of life for citizens and communities. In terms of the community priorities, they should be determined based on established community need and community concern. That can obviously only be determined through community engagement and participation, which should be at the heart of the entire process. And again, just saying there, regard should be given when developing the community elements to ensuring a meaningful participation by communities in the planning process, but also consultation and engagement with communities more generally. And look, the entire process should be participative, should be consultative and collaborative, but that's particularly important when it comes to the community elements. And there should be a strong focus on engagement with stakeholders, with communities and with citizens. And the general public should see themselves in the LECPs in terms of their needs, their concerns, and also the opportunities for them. Related to that, there should be utilisation of community development principles in, again, LECP development, but also across the work of the LCDCs more generally. So bottom-up approaches, participation and empowerment of individuals and communities. And finally, regard, again, to be given to setting the local context for mainstream funding programmes such as local development and social inclusion programmes and community services programmes. There's a wide variety of funding coming through the local authorities, all with very, very good policy objectives, but it is for the LECPs to make the best use of that funding by setting objectives based on established community need that has come from the consultation and the participative approaches. And then finally, I've just pulled out a number of illustrative examples of strategies that are of relevance on the community side. Appendix 6 of the guidelines does set out a more comprehensive list, not exhaustive, but just setting out some of relevance. So the ones I've picked out are just the Roadmap for Social Inclusion, the Healthy Ireland Framework, the National Strategy for Women and Girls, the New Youth Justice Strategy, and then also the National Traveller and Roma Inclusion Strategy. And just at that point, I'm going to hand over to Regina just to deal with the economic elements.
Thanks a million, Lisa. I'll just read through the economic element of the guidelines now and provide a short overview of the implementation, monitoring and review processes. The Local Government Reform Act 2014 requires that the economics of the economic elements of the LECP are developed by the local authority through their strategic policy committees for economic development and enterprise. So it's very important that membership of your economic SPC includes a wide variety of representation from the business sector, farming interest, environmental groups, and the voluntary and community sectors. This will get the best range of outlooks for the economic components of your LECP. Local authorities, however, cannot effectively perform their economic development function in isolation from each other. And it's important that you take into account regional factors when preparing your LECP. It's necessary to engage with the relevant regional assembly, as your LECP has to be consistent with the regional, spatial and economic strategies and the regional enterprise plans for your area. This is essential to avoid unnecessary duplication, negative competition, or any unrealistic aspirations in your plan. Another cross-cutting strategy is that in your LECP is the Housing for All. This is the government's housing plan to 2030. Housing for All requires local authorities to consider their housing needs when formulating both economic and community elements of their LECP. Other government policies and strategies that should be considered in developing the economic elements of your LECP in particular are listed here. However, this is a non-exhaustive list, and Appendix 6 of the guidelines provides you with a good starting point to consider the current government policies and strategies in the development of your LECPs. While local authorities have a key role in promoting economic development in their localities, it's important to note that there are many other actors who also contribute to local economic progress and whose strategies and plans can also inform the key economic priorities for your LECP. This list shows some, but not all, of the principal organisations that can have a role in local economic development. Some will be more relevant depending on each local authority area, but it's important that these bodies are consulted in the development of your LECP. And once they're on board from the outset, they'll be more likely to be committed to supporting the actions of the LECP, in particularly those that may be relevant to their own field. Section 44 of the 2014 Act provides for the economic areas which local authorities must have regard in preparing their LECPs. However, the main features of supporting the economic elements are summarised in the guidelines under 6 main economic action areas that are listed here. Each of these action areas brings into focus a particular set of activities that, when put in place and supported, will contribute to economic progress. It's also worth noting that these economic action areas are intrinsically linked, and successes in one area will contribute to successes in another, and vice versa. In creating your local economic and community plan, you first need to consider your high-level goals and objectives. Your high-level goals and objectives for both the economic and community elements should be specific, measurable, and have an associated timeframe. They should specify the relevant outcomes, and they should include appropriate metrics or KPIs for measuring those outcomes. The types of high-level objectives in very general terms, which are likely to warrant inclusion in your LECP framework, are indicated in the guidelines. Then, moving on to your implementation plans, which should include activities or actions that will contribute to the achievement of international, national, regional, and local goals and objectives. They should identify appropriate partners relevant to each specific action and clearly outline the role of each partner in the delivery of that action. They should develop particular initiatives, projects, or incentives that would support the implementation of the actions that are identified. These actions may span a number of years, so an estimate of the number of years it will take to complete the action should be indicated in the plan and also considered in the context of monitoring and review. So while much of the material in the guidelines is concerned with the formulation of the plan, the most critical aspect of the entire process is the effectiveness of the execution of the specific actions contained in the implementation plans. Your implementation plans should be clear on the responsibilities for the delivery of specific actions. It may be useful to include a table of actions that also details the roles and responsibilities for each of the relevant stakeholders and partners, to ensure that everyone is aware of what role they play from the outset. Your LECP actions should be monitored and reviewed on an ongoing basis as well as periodically. In monitoring, evaluating, and reviewing the progress of the implementation plans, it's important to consider your high-level indicators that were established when the goals and objectives of the LECP framework were put in place. The progress of each action should be evaluated under these and the key performance indicators identified in your implementation plans. While reviews should be carried out periodically, an integral part of the process is that each action should be monitored on an ongoing basis, and any adaptations or changes made, if required, to the implementation plans. This will involve ongoing engagement with all of the LECP stakeholders and partners to identify any issues as they arise. Finally, the LECP guidelines aim to provide comprehensive material on the various steps involved in the LECP process, but all stakeholders should be aware of their need to be compliant with the relevant legislation involved, particularly the specific elements of the Local Government Reform Act 2014, and they also need to be consistent with other national frameworks and strategies in their plans. So I'd like to thank you all for your time today. And again, if you have any questions, comments or feedback, please send us an email at lcdsupport@drct.gov.ie. Thanks very much, and I'll hand you back to Barbara.
Thank you very much indeed to both Lisa and Regina for what I think was a most comprehensive presentation, but also really easy to follow and understand. And thank you so much. The guidelines are, it certainly makes me want to go back and have another look at the guidelines, and I'm sure you all listening will feel the same. But please do take them up on the offer of, if you have any questions or comments, to come back, send us an email, and we'll do our best to help you and support you. So without further ado, we'll move on now to our next speaker, who, as I said earlier, is Sonia Kavanagh. And Sonia is Interim Chief Executive in Kildare County Council, but Sonia was also one of 4 local authority representatives on the advisory group that really did a lot of the heavy lifting in the development of these guidelines. And Sonia is now going to give us the perspective of the local authority in relation to the guidelines. Over to you now, Sonia. Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. Good morning, everyone, and thanks to the department for the invitation to contribute to this morning's event, and to my CCMA colleague, Alan Farrell, who assisted with the presentation. If I may start by giving you some background on myself, I've worked in the local government sector for 27 years. When I worked in the housing department in the noughties, I began the process of assembling a team of community workers to work with the most vulnerable communities in the county. I saw what a community development ethos could bring and how we could enable communities to become independent. I worked with the community in Newbridge to deliver the Kildare's first family resource centre, which has since thrived and is now looking to expand to offer its services to the wider community. After that, I went off to build roads and so on, but I returned to community development in 2017 as Director of Services and Chief Officer of the LCDC. At that stage, the hard work of creating the first local economic and community plan had already been done, and I had to read myself into the role and all of the many acronyms that come with it. Lisa and Regina have already set out the context for the establishment of LCDCs and the huge reform programme that started in 2014. My focus for this presentation will be on the LECP and the local authority perspective. I hope you'll agree when I say that LCDCs will not reach their potential or deliver on their objectives if all of the key stakeholders do not actively collaborate and contribute. The LCDC and the LECP is led and supported by the local authority, but it has a broader remit that embraces all aspects of life in our counties. We've also seen in the past number of years that the LCDC has become the conduit for significant funding. This is very positive and welcome, but it has also meant that the LCDC has become more administrative, and we will have to create a space in order to deliver on a new LECP. COVID-19 has also had a significant impact on us all. If we can take any positives from it, I would say it has reinforced the importance of community, and it has also reinforced the fact that local authorities are well placed to coordinate local services. As you know, the adoption of the LECP is a function of Council, and the guidelines refer to the process of engaging with the municipal districts and the regional assemblies before being presented to full Council for approval. Economic actions contained in the plan are developed and overseen by the Local Authority's Strategic Policy Committee for Economic Development and Enterprise. There is an opportunity through this process to ensure that the economic actions are in line with the other relevant economic policies and plans for the county and region. Community actions are developed and overseen by the LCDC, and it is imperative that the objectives and actions contained in the LECP are broader than the local authority's core remit. For example, there may be a particular focus on education or deaf schools or youth mental health, none of which are functions of the local authority, but all of which contribute significantly to the well-being and quality of life of our citizens. So we now have the guidelines to assist in the development of our second local economic and community plan. The process by which the guidelines were created was extremely collaborative, and I must thank DRCD and our own parent department for their engagement and their willingness to take into account practitioners' views and experience. When I think about the LECP, I think of it as the yin to the county development's yang. The County Development Plan is the blueprint for spatial development in the county. However, equally important is the LECP, which focuses on well-being and improving quality of life for those living in our counties. Each county already has an LECP. You have the knowledge, experience and learnings that you've gained since 2014, and you have a network of contacts and partners built up that will help and assist in the creation of this new plan. As the guidelines set out, the LECP framework will outline the high-level goals and objectives, and the implementation plans will focus on more practical and pragmatic actions to realise those goals and objectives. Key to all of this and a cornerstone of the plan should be an evidence-based approach. This means that the socio-economic demographics of the county have been collated and interpreted to create an evidence baseline of the county. This probably sounds more complicated than it is, but I would suggest that the forward planning team in your county probably has amassed a significant amount of this type of information for the county development plan process. The regional authorities also have very important statistical information, as does the Central Statistics Office. I'll go into a bit more detail on current opportunities and challenges later in the presentation, but suffice to say, these are often two sides of the same coin. High-level goals and objectives. I'm using the Kildare LECP example here to illustrate that the high-level goals and objectives don't have to be nebulous notions. They are the key objectives that you, your colleagues, the elected members and the LCDC members are aware of and see as priorities. For example, one of Kildare's high-level goals is employment and enterprise. And the objective in the first LECP states it's to actively promote, support and enable economic activity, business development and employment in Kildare, building on its core strengths while responding to identified economic development challenges. This objective is in line with the Regional Spatial and Economic Strategy, the Regional Enterprise Plan, the County Development Plan and the Council's own Economic Development Strategy. These high-level goals will be realised by the practical actions that you will list in the implementation plans. Now back to the challenges and opportunities that are ahead of us. As I said earlier, an evidence-based approach is key to this process. It is challenging that we won't have up-to-date census figures. However, the new format of the LECP means that there will be opportunities through the implementation plan process to be flexible and to take into account new information that comes to hand and changing demographics if that is the case. I would encourage other local authorities to put a significant effort into this stage in the process, as I know that this approach has been instrumental in helping Kildare to secure funding. In a county that is often perceived as wealthy, it has been invaluable to have baseline information that shows disparity in the allocation of national resources and pockets of significant deprivation. In terms of developing high-level goals, I would suggest that there is no need to reinvent the wheel. There are objectives outlined in your outgoing plans. There are objectives contained in the County Development Plan and the regional plans. I would suggest that the focus should be on ensuring that all of these policies are aligned and complementary. Internal and external support will also be essential. The creation of a new LECP is a very significant body of work that will take time and resources to complete. There will be a need for cross-departmental support internally. There will also be a need for support from the elected members and from all of the LCDC's partners. If the LECP is viewed purely as the Council's plan, then it will be left solely to the Council to implement it. This is a challenge, but it's also an opportunity for key stakeholders to put their own mark on this plan, to input and to contribute. I know that funding organisations and bodies are anxious to ensure that funding is being delivered in line with strategic objectives. Having an objective included in the LECP and having the support of the LCDC may assist in the leveraging of funds. This in itself should be an incentive to collaborate. The guidelines refer to a consultation plan. I would suggest that a detailed consultation plan or roadmap will be essential. The plan should map out the key stakeholders to be consulted, but also how you intend to consult. In the current COVID climate, in-person consultation will be difficult, but maybe this is an opportunity to consult with hard-to-reach cohorts by being somewhat innovative in the way we consult. I'll take the final two bullet points together as they're interconnected. The implementation plans call for specific actions over a shorter time frame. The intention, as was said earlier, is to be agile, flexible and responsive to changing circumstances. This is very much welcomed, but it also requires a significant amount of interaction with the LCDC partners as we seek regular updates regarding progress on specific actions. This is something that we'll have to keep under review to ensure that we strike that correct balance between retaining the LCDC's strategic focus and becoming more administrative in nature. I'm going to finish up now with a couple of final thoughts and comments. The first is a quote that I don't usually like using, as I could never understand why you'd want to eat an elephant, but I think the point here is that this is a mammoth task, a task that could seem overwhelming. The question is, how do you eat an elephant? And the answer is you eat it one bite at a time. And I think that's really appropriate in this case. This is a significant body of work, but you have done it before. You created the first LECP when you didn't have the level of expertise and experience that you have now. Now you have these guidelines, you have an existing plan, and you have examples of good practice around the country. There is great experience in the Chief Officers Fora, so I would suggest that you talk to your peers and use that accumulated experience to make these new plans relevant and reflective of where we are now. Finally, I have to confess I've stolen this proverb from my colleague Susan Buchel because I think it sums up the process ahead of us really well. It is essential that there is buy-in and ownership of the new plan. It is essential that all stakeholders involved work together to make the strategic objectives in this plan become a reality. In order to do this, we must create a plan that belongs to all of the LCDC partners. A plan with the ambition to improve the well-being and quality of life for everyone in our counties. That is our objective, and that's what we are all working towards. Thank you for your attention, and I'll hand back now to Barbara.
Thank you very much indeed, Sonia, for a fantastic presentation and some really good advice there, right from the coalface, from someone who has been intimately involved, as she's told us, in the process before. And Sonia, I particularly liked your phrase about the LECP being the yin to the county development plan's yang, because I've often found myself stuck when people ask me, but sure, what's the difference between the LECP and the county development plan? So that's a terrific analogy. And also then your final point about the importance of the LECP belonging to everyone. If it's seen only as the council's plan, it won't work. It needs to be owned by everybody. And that's a terrific piece of advice. So thank you very much indeed, Sonia, for your contribution today, and indeed your contribution, your very valuable contribution on the advisory group. So we'll move on now to our final speaker before Mary will bring things to a close. And our next speaker is Kieran Moylan. And Kieran is Principal Officer in the Department of Rural and Community Development in the Libraries Development and Community Policy Unit. And as I said earlier, Kieran is the person who has the responsibility now for taking this forward from a policy perspective in the department. So Kieran is going to fill you in now on the next steps that we have in mind to support you in this process. So over to you now, Kieran.
Okay, thank you very much, Barbara, and good morning, everybody. I'm delighted to be with you here this morning. And as Barbara said, the purpose of my presentation is to give some information on what we're planning in respect of further information and training events to support you all in the LECP process. So I suppose there's 5 areas I wish to cover. Some information about a support page that's been put in place on a SharePoint site hosted by the LGMA, our plans for a series of thematic workshops in the next quarter, which will be designed and delivered in partnership with other departments and with local authorities and other stakeholders. Our plans for an interdepartmental event also early next year. A project that we have initiated to support LCDCs in particular in engaging people from the more marginalised communities in local development processes. And finally, to follow up on some points made by Sonia in relation to the availability of data, our intentions in relation to supporting the processes into the future with improved data provision. So first of all, we have, with the support of the LGMA, created an LDC support page, and there will be information available on the page, including copies of all the presentations from today's event and other resources as they become available. So we certainly would encourage local authorities and the LCDs in particular to access that page and to see the information that we will be making available on the page. Secondly, it is our intention to host a series of thematic workshops in the first quarter of next year, looking at a number of specific aspects of the LECP plans. What we have in mind currently would be a workshop in relation to the environmental, sustainable development and climate action elements, a workshop in relation to the community and social aspects of the plans, a workshop on the economic infrastructure, local enterprise development themes, and possibly later on a workshop on bringing it all together and framing the document in its final drafting and so on in terms of presentation. The target audiences for these events may differ somewhat, and we will be working with other stakeholders to identify the most appropriate audiences for each one. And also to stress that unlike this morning's event, it is our intention that these events will be interactive and there will be an opportunity for feedback and exchange of information rather than just as an information event. We're also intending to host an event with other departments and national agencies. This has a number of purposes. First of all, we intend to raise the profile of the work that the LCDCs are doing in particular, and this was one of the recommendations that came from the recent review of the LCDCs. But it's also important that we raise awareness among government departments and agencies of the LECP process and the importance of the LECP plans at local level for the delivery and effective implementation of a wide range of national strategies and regional strategies and initiatives. So this is something we feel will be important, and we will be encouraging all government departments and agencies that wish to see strategies and measures implemented through the LECPs that they engage fully and proactively with their local LCDCs and local authorities. We have been successful in securing funding from the Dormant Accounts Fund to put in place a 2-year programme which is around developing best practices and methods to support the engagement of the most marginalised groups in local development and decision-making processes. We would see certainly the process over the next 12 months in the development of the LECPs as an important active research process whereby we can support a number of pilot projects in 3 selected LCDCs to have a demonstration effect for all LCDCs and how this process can be done effectively. And it's our intention to undertake an expression of interest process in the new year to select 3 good demonstration projects that we can work with. And this project, we will have an initial information event once a national coordinator is appointed, but also we will hold other events as the project is unfolding so that the learnings can be shared with everybody. As Sonia mentioned, we are proceeding with the development of the LECPs in the absence of data from Census 21, which has now been postponed to Census 22. We have, where relevant, identified potential sources of data that can be used in setting the socioeconomic context in each local authority area and in support of the development of the framework. It is our intention to establish a subgroup of the advisory group to assist in preparing more comprehensive socioeconomic data sets, in particular when the local area statistics from Census 22 become available. And this will also assist in setting some high-level comparative indicators that can be used for performance monitoring purposes. So that's the next steps for us. For yourselves, and following the two previous presentations, I think the two next critical steps that need to be taken are the establishment of the advisory steering group, who, as set out in the guidelines, will oversee the overall process. And Lisa has already provided some information on what the membership of that should be and what its role should be. Also, we feel that if your local authority hasn't already done so, that the process of reviewing the current local economic and community plan should commence. The guidelines aren't prescriptive as to how that review should take place, but certainly as a minimum, we feel that there should be a desk-based exercise undertaken combined with feedback and engagement with the relevant SPC and LCDC structures. And I think the learning from that process can assist both in refining and redefining strategic development goals as stated by Sonia, but also I think it can also provide you with guidance and learnings for the process which you used to develop the previous plan, and that maybe that can be developed and improved. So that's it from us in terms of formal presentations. As stated by Barbara at the outset, we have set up a support email address at lcdcsupport@drcd.gov.ie. If you have queries or suggestions or comments or feedback, please use the email provided, and we will certainly get back to you as soon as we can. So with that, I wish to thank you all for your attendance this morning on behalf of the department. We're delighted that so many of you chose to tune in this morning, and we hope that you found the event very informative. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Mary Hurley, the Assistant Secretary General in the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage, to make a few closing remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kieran, and thank you to all the speakers. I think as Barbara outlined, we've had excellent presentations this morning, and I'm very taken with Sonia's quote. I wrote it down there: if you want to go far, go together. And I think this morning is a demonstration of how both the Department of Rural and Community Development and the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage, with all the stakeholders, local authorities, community groups, have worked so well together in terms of preparing these guidelines. And they really are excellent guidelines. And I think they set a pathway for the preparation of very good plans in local areas. I suppose what I'm very taken with this morning is how local economic plans are really going to be community led, and they're going to be built on participation and community engagement and based on the needs of communities. And that's really, really important, that they're meaningful, that they make a difference and they deliver for the community and the economy in local authority areas. One of the things, I suppose, from the perspective of the Department of Housing, I'm very pleased to see that Housing for All and the needs of people to have quality housing and roofs over their head is at the heart of the guidelines also. So that's a really good thing. Very taken, Lisa and Regina gave us details in relation to the plan and the guidelines themselves. And I suppose one of the slides that struck me was the slide around implementation review. And I think the development of these guidelines has made it easy to review and to be agile and flexible. And obviously it took a lot of work in putting the guidelines together, but they've set the way for really, really good plans in the future. one of the things I suppose that has struck me has been how local authorities working with the LCDCs have made a real difference during COVID. And I think there's lots of things we can take away, positive things we can take away from how local authorities, whether it be the community call, whether it be restart grants, whether it be working with the HSC on vaccinations. There's so much that we can take away from that process and learnings that can be built in, I think, to the plans as we go forward in the future, and will make communities better places for people to live. I know Kieran set out very well the details of how we're going to go forward. There's obviously a journey ahead in terms of preparing the plans, but it's really, really helpful, I think, that Barbara and her team, working with my own team, will have training events and we'll have engagement events with all involved. I think it was a really interesting morning. I think it was a really informative morning. I think the presentations outlined, as Barbara said, I think earlier on, in a very clear way, what's required. And I think, again, going back to Sonia, it's about working together, not rushing. It's about doing it right, identifying the needs of communities and reflecting them in the LECPs. Obviously, again, and I like the yin and the yang with the community development plan. That's important too. So look, I just want to thank everybody for this morning. Lisa, Regina, Kieran, Sonia and Barbara, you also. I think it was a very informative morning. I think we have great clarity now since the guidelines were issued, and they really do build on lessons and previous plans. We all know communities and the economy at the moment is a constantly changing and flexible thing. These guidelines allow for that. They allow for review, they allow for monitoring, and I know they'll make a real difference when people start to develop their plans and their frameworks. So look, just to thank everybody. I look forward to meeting you again, maybe when we're a bit further down the road in terms of plans, when we can again come together to review progress. So thank you again this morning, and thank you to all the participants.